Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'm Jim Lloyd. I'm the superintendent for Olmsted Falls Schools. And before I pass it off to a couple others to say a few words, I just wanted to say on behalf of the school board, central office, our student services department, our school counselors, and our family and community link coordinator, I wanted to thank you for being here and welcome back for part 2 of this 3-part series. We're pleased to be welcoming back Dr. Barlow to talk to us again. Tonight's focus will be on anxiety and mood, which you may have experienced some of that during the 2 snow days that we had. Sorry. As a father of 3 humans, I can tell you that these emotions continue on in their lives. My children, I guess I call them that, are 24, 22, and 19. The problems, maybe the moodiness and anxiety, those things are always still there. I think the problems sometimes get a little bigger, but I think some of the strategies and things that you're going to talk about tonight will transfer to later on in your lives as they get as big as you are. It's great to have so many of you here tonight, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to bring up Dr. Goss to say a few words. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm just going to go over some housekeeping for the group. So there are sign-in sheets at the table. If you can sign your first and last name, your email address, that allows us to follow up with any information from tonight's event and our event in March that we're looking forward to as well. Something different if you came to the last session, we are now having Chromebooks on the table. This is a chance for you to submit questions throughout the presentation. Towards the end, I and Julian Allen will turn the Chromebook over to Dr. Barlow, and she'll look at the questions that way and have some devoted Q&A time at the end. I ask if you could just, during the presentation, maybe every couple minutes, just peek at the Chromebook and tap the mouse pad. So volunteer who you are at the table. That way the computer does not close out. Thank you. We also have refreshments in the back, which is also on the way to the restroom. So there's coffee and there's some cookies back there as well. At the end of the presentation, if you wanted to, you can scan the QR code on the table, and that'll give you a chance to give us feedback, which we'd love to get. We look forward to reading through that after the last presentation, and it allowed us to tweak some things for tonight. And then finally, we will be live streaming this on YouTube. So if for some reason you need to leave early or you wanted to watch it again later, you can access that. At the front table here, we have handouts of the PowerPoints. If you didn't grab one on your way in, don't hesitate in walking up and grabbing one right now or on your way out. And also some other information about our student service staff at the front table here. So I think that's everything. Without further ado, I'm going to bring Dr. Barlow up.
Will I be okay if I take this out? Okay. So tonight we're going to be talking mostly about, well, we will be talking pretty much all about anxiety and I guess sort of moodiness or emotions, increased emotionality in kids, and how to really, I guess a lot of parents have questions like, you know, is this normal? Like some degree of anxiety or nervousness is normal. Some degree of ups and downs in mood is normal. But how do I know when I should worry, right? And so that's what I'm going to be trying to answer tonight and give you some tools to use when you're dealing with sort of expected and just sort of typical, like this is kind of your normal anxiety that might pop up from time to time, but we can still do things about it, right? We can still learn how to manage that, even if we're not going to call it a disorder. And then what are some of the things that you might be looking into if this does cross a line into more of a disorder, more interference? So when we talk about first focusing on stress and anxiety, you know, it is important that we all are on the same page. Stress is a normal, healthy part of life. All of us experience stress, and when stress remains in sort of that healthy zone, that kind of typical, I just have to deal with maybe an increase in work that I've got to get done, or it's exam period, or there's some sort of, I'm the first day of school, right? There are these events that we know can be stressful for people, and that's a good thing. Stress is actually protective. It is helpful. It is motivating, right? So a lot of times we give an example like, if you've got, if you're having people come over to your house and your house is a mess, you might feel a little bit stressed about people coming over to your house, and therefore you're then motivated to get stuff cleaned up, put away, and maybe that can actually be helpful for you to experience that stress. But if you just don't really care that much, you're not necessarily going to have that push to get something done, right? Studying for a test, we talk about that a lot with kids too. But if you're so stressed out that you're actually overwhelmed, right? And so then you just can't do anything. You're sort of paralyzed by it. You don't even know where to start. There's too much to do. That's when we're starting to cross over into, maybe this is not helpful and protective kind of stress. Maybe this is crossing over into more of an anxiety, when you're feeling paralyzed or stuck, you're shutting down, you don't know what to do. Or if, as my family sometimes experiences, if you're very stressed about people coming over, and now all of a sudden you're not just motivated to clean up, you're also barking orders and snapping at people and finding fault in everything they do, which occasionally happens in my household, you might be tiptoeing over the line into this is maybe not helpful, right? It's nobody around you enjoys this stress that you're experiencing, so maybe we should learn how to manage that, right? I kind of, normally when I give this kind of a talk about stress and anxiety, I don't really include this sort of middle section of what's expected, but I find as a psychologist over the last couple of years, when people are coming into my office for a diagnostic evaluation, and it's the first time I'm meeting them, and they're talking to me about, I just have no motivation. I just don't feel like doing anything. I used to care about school and I don't really care about it anymore. I'm yeah, so join the club because we're all kind of there right now. There's some level of disturbance that a lot of us are experiencing right now, whether it has to do with mood and kind of like a burnout almost, or anxiety. And just, decision fatigue and being kind of worn out from everything that's going on. So I'm including this kind of expected zone here because I think that it's important for us to try to think about and kind of look through this lens of, well, what's going on? Given the circumstances, given what you have going on in your life, kid or parent or whoever we're talking about, would we expect that maybe you would be having a period of fatigue or increased anxiety? And that might help us figure out, does this cross a line diagnostically into a disorder or not? But more importantly, I think it just helps us figure out, what do we do about this? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of our children and ourselves in order to deal with some of this stuff? So I just want to kind of point out why we might expect some of these difficulties in recent times. So, obviously with the pandemic, there are all sorts of restrictions and shutdowns. There are varying and changing rules. So when all of the rules that are changing and, okay, wait, this place says you should wear a mask, but nobody in here is wearing a mask. If I'm not wearing a mask, what should I do? What is the right thing to do here? It's hard for adults to understand a lot of that. When we're talking about kindergartners or first graders, one of the beauteous things about kindergartners and first graders is they do very well with rules, with clear, consistent rules. And that's a big part of what school is for kindergartners and first graders. These are the rules. Let me repeat the rules. I'm going to repeat the rules. They learn the rules. Well, when the rules around what to do keep changing, that can be incredibly anxiety-producing for kids who find comfort in knowing what to expect. And that comes from adults around them. This is what you can expect from me. This is what we expect from you. Those clear boundaries and rules. Family stressors. So, kids soak up what's going on around them. So if in their house, you know, maybe they've got parents who are stressed about balancing, like, working from home and taking care of kids, or maybe they're in some line of work where there are especially increased demands. You know, maybe they're a healthcare provider, or maybe they're a restaurant owner and they're concerned about, you know, financial stress or something, or maybe they're taking care of parents who have been sick, or they know people who've been sick. There's just a lot of us have a lot more on our plates these days, and the kids in our house, you know, in our homes, our stress trickles down, right? And sometimes it's because we might not have a great handle on our stress, and so kind of like I was describing, I might tend to do when I'm trying to get my house ready for people coming over or something. If we're very stressed out about what's going on at work or in our personal lives or whatever, we might not be the, like, most even-keeled kind of parents. You know, we might be snapping at our kids or whatever, and they feel that, obviously, you know, and that changes what their experience at home is like. But even if we think that we are, like, managing things very well, in terms of our, you know, we're keeping calm, we're keeping patient, there are some kids who I think are just emotional sponges, and they are, you know, soaking up the emotional energy around them. That is not just what they experience in their homes, that is what they experience at school. So we know that kids in school spend as much time with their teachers as they do with their parents. And there are studies that show that teachers' cortisol levels correlate with the cortisol levels of their kids in their classroom. Now, we don't know if that's a chicken or the egg sort of situation, right? Like, is it a really difficult class increases the stress level of the teachers, or the teachers' stress trickles down to the kids? We know that teachers and students' brain activity synchronizes. Like, you know the phrase, we're really in sync? Teachers and their students sync up neurologically, okay? So, and they do this with parents too. Our kids are reflections of how we're doing as adults. Parents, teachers, right? Okay, so that kind of stress they're feeding off of sometimes. Loss, you know, there's been a lot of death that people are having to grieve. Whether it's related to COVID or not, it's almost like, you know, you're just hearing about it so much more, and I feel like there's a little bit of a tendency to, like, oh, well, and then this happened today, and oh, did you hear about this? And then, and my friend told me about her husband who did such and such. You know, so there's sometimes like a little bit of a, I don't want to say like a one-upping, because I know nobody's really trying to do it in a one-upping sort of sense, but it's almost as if our conversations have turned to like a reporting of the tragedies going on around us, right? And maybe we are trying to do that with our kids not hearing, but they sometimes do just pick up on this kind of stuff. And of course on the news, you know, when they're hearing all this stuff on the news. Another thing that I think we really need to be paying attention to is the development of our kids. So when we have, you know, when we see that like kids in 3rd grade, their last sort of normal school year was when they were in kindergarten. And if you think about things like what's going on outside of school, I work with kindergartners who maybe if this was 5 years ago, the plan for this kid would have been maybe that they were going to be in preschool for a couple years and then go to kindergarten or whatever. Preschool teachers are used to kids having trouble separating from their parents. You know, daycare providers in toddler rooms and preschool rooms are very used to helping kids separate from their parents and learn how to like follow rules from other adults and things like that. For a lot of families, they really changed up their plans, whether they wanted to or not. You know, if it was necessity or preference, a lot of people changed up their plans, and so you have kids in kindergarten who maybe never really separated from their parents before. You know, they haven't had that experience. So they're dealing with like that experience, plus learning all the rules about being in school, plus learning how to read, plus dealing, like, socializing with friends that they have. You know, if they weren't in a daycare or a preschool, they also probably weren't around tons of other kids and having to solve conflict and share and play in the same space. So there's a lot of stuff that that kids have almost been like picked up and plopped down, and they didn't necessarily have a lot of that practice or the building of those skills. So we have to keep that in mind, because a lot of times we're still expecting kids, like kids who are applying for colleges and stuff, we're kind of like expecting that they're ready for all of that, when really they've had a little bit of a pause for the last couple of years. So we have to keep that in mind, and how that could be affecting their stress. The political climate, though, this is something that I feel is really having an impact on our kids. And what I think about is a divorce, like a high conflict divorce situation. I don't think anybody would argue or suggest that a kid whose parents are involved in a high conflict divorce, they just cannot see eye to eye on anything, everything becomes an argument. I don't think that anyone would ever say that that's a great situation for the kid to be in. A lot of people, say like, yeah, this is sort of what we're dealing with, right? This is what kids are dealing with. This is what all of our kids in this country are dealing with right now, with divided adults all around them. There's a lot of anger, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blaming, whether it's between, one political party and another political party, or schools and families. There's just a lot of conflict, and that is trickling down to kids. And when you think about like schools and families and being in conflict, and maybe what people are hearing on the news, or even what their friends are saying, like, well, friends maybe coming in and stating like a political view or something that maybe they've heard from their parents, and a kid kind of like, well, that doesn't really match up with what I have experienced or something. But if they're hearing adults who they trust, whether that's parents or grandparents or friends or whatever, but if they're hearing adults who they trust say really bad things about a school system or teachers, but then that's where they have to go all day, and they kind of like some of those teachers, and they're kind of nice, and it's kind of good. That's very confusing for kids to be in the middle of that, and to feel like they have to pick a side. And this matters. Like, this is what kids are coming in dealing with and kind of unloading and feeling confused about and having to sort out. So we have to keep in mind like this climate that's going on around kids and what they're soaking up. We have to be thinking about the news and just all the exposure to like tragedies and bad news and all this stuff going on, and how it's kind of impacted our conversation. So just in terms of kind of a quick rundown of what we have seen so far in terms of our data, we know that at this point, rates of anxiety and depression in youth in America have pretty much doubled from their pre-COVID rates. So, I imagine we'll find probably more studies. This is from a meta-analysis, so this was looking at 29 different studies. But we're finding things like, I didn't include this on the slide, but like older adolescent girls seem to be struggling a bit more than some of the younger kids. We know that people who have a neurodevelopmental disorder, so something like ADHD or a learning disorder, they're being hit harder. We know that suicidal ideation, self-injurious behaviors, these are things that are increasing. This is on the rise. Therapist wait lists are increasing. Therapist caseloads, so like the American Psychological Association surveyed psychologists and therapists and asked, are you taking on more cases? Do you have a wait list? The rates of, just trying to get services is really hard. So we know that what is happening around our kids is there's this sort of collective and cumulative and chronic stress going on. And when I think about that, I guess I kind of think about like it's all around them. Everywhere they look, people are dealing with more. And when I think about that, I guess I sort of think about it from myself or on a personal level. If there's something stressful going on in my life, think about this a few years ago. If I was really stressed about something, say at work, I might be able to go home and turn to my husband and kind of lean on him a little bit because maybe he's in a place where he's kind of doing okay, right? Or maybe I call my mom and I sort of lean on her a little bit, or I lean on my sister, or one of my friends, or a coworker, or something. In other times, if I had some area of my life that was causing more stress for me, I could find support around me pretty close by. Well, now, for most of us, in whatever direction we turn, everybody's dealing with more. So some of us are like, well, I don't really want to put that on somebody else right now because I know what they're dealing with. Or, well, this is my problem, but I know, she's dealing with all of this stuff, so, like, my problem's not as big as her problem, so I don't really want. So there's this sort of, it's all around, whereas before, and I guess when I think about my own sort of caseload, if I thought about percentages, I could think about, let's say if I was seeing, 25 kids in a week, I might have 5 kids who are coming in that week telling me, like, things are going really good, maybe we're phasing out, we're not having to make an appointment for another couple months. I might have a couple kids telling me that they're, they've got some good stuff going on and got some not so good stuff going on, but I don't have 25 people in crisis. Right now, pretty much everybody I'm seeing every week is in crisis, that's what's happening right now. And it adds up. And when I think about it adds up, this is something that I do in therapy with a lot of the kids I work with. So Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. People familiar with this book or movie? I guess it's a movie now. Okay, so one of the things that I like to do with kids is take like an empty vase, and I take a pitcher of water, and I put it in like a tray or something that can collect the spills, because what I have the kid do is, in the book, every time there's something that happens, like, Alexander wakes up and he's got gum in his hair. Well, you gotta pour a little bit of that water into the vase. Okay, Alexander goes to have breakfast and his brother's got the prize out of the cereal box and he was really hoping to get the prize. We gotta pour a little more water. Every time something terrible, no good, very bad, or horrible happens, we gotta pour more water into that vase. And what happens when the vase gets like halfway full, he's yelling at his friends at recess. When it's all the way full, he's punching his brother, right? And what I think, the reason why I use this with kids, like in therapy sessions, is I try to help them understand, things build up for us. And if we don't learn how to like empty that a little bit, get rid of it, or like put the pitcher down so things aren't filling up, the water's gotta go somewhere. It's gonna spill out, and we have to figure out how to, and part of this I use to try to figure out, like, so what are the little things that add up for you? What are all those little things that fill up your vase, And so sometimes we'll walk through, like, well, you had to get up and it was cold and you just wanted to stay in your pajamas, and then you wanted pancakes for breakfast, but your mom told you there wasn't enough time for pancakes for breakfast, and then you couldn't find your snow pants, and if you don't have your snow pants, you're not allowed to go outside for recess, and then, so I want them to tell me, what are all the things that happen in their day that build up? Because when you're an adult, and if you're an adult who doesn't spend tons of time talking to kids, you probably don't think that kids really their problems really aren't that big of a deal. But when you put yourself and like remember what it is like to be a little kid who's like, well, now I can't find my snow pants. Now I'm rushed and I feel like I'm not doing anything right. Like when you put yourself in that kid's shoes through their very bad day and you can develop a little more empathy, all those little things do matter, right? And kind of figuring out as a family, well, what are some of the things that we can do? So how can we either take some of that away? Like, some kids, this is an example I give a lot of parents, like, we do a lot of correcting and reminding kids when we probably don't need to. So if a kid just spilled something, let's say he just spilled his soda there on the table. If I was like, oh, that's why you have to be really careful. It's like, well, duh. Yeah, thanks for that really helpful advice after I already spilled it, Like, you don't need me to tell you that after you spilled it, right? But we do this, and kids hear this all the time. So if you know that your kid is like, every time they hear a little correction like that, it's another drop, it's another drop, it's another drop. Try to think about not saying that sometimes. It's already spilled, right? Like if your kid goes and starts starts to get paper towels and they're going to clean it up, you can say, oh, thanks for taking care of that, right? If they're just sitting there looking at the spilled drink, instead of, well, clean that up, what are you doing? Why are you just sitting there? Maybe you could just pass some paper towels, and then that kid's probably going to get the signal like, oh, you want me to clean this up, you know? Maybe not always, but if you've got a kid who would just clean it up if they were given paper towels, then you don't have to give that verbal, hey, clean it up, right? And for a lot of kids, that verbal stuff is like more and more and more, and it builds and builds and builds. And we just have to make sure we're finding opportunities for our kids to reset. All right, so one of the things that we always need to make sure we're talking about when we are addressing anxiety is the fight or flight response. So this is humans' natural neurological response to stress and threats. You know, we talk about cavemen, and we talk about when cavemen were around and they were like cozy in their cave and safe in their cave, and they knew there was no danger there in their cave, but then they'd get hungry, right? And so they'd have to like roll their boulder away or whatever, I don't know, sneak through, I don't know how they got through their boulder entrance, but they'd have to like get out of their cave and go find some food. But the world was a pretty dangerous place there, so when they were finding food, they had to be really, really vigilant. They had to make sure that, like, if they heard a noise, they were ready to run away or fight or protect themselves from that danger, right? And we have since kind of expanded fight or flight. So fight, you know, fight off the predator, right? Flight, run away from it. We have since expanded our understanding to freeze. You know, so there are, and that is another response. Sometimes it's like, okay, if I just stay really still, maybe I'll blend in, and this predator will just pass me by and not attack me or eat me, right? Because I'm not strong enough to fight it off, and I am not fast enough to run away, so maybe I'll just blend into the background. This is when our kids shut down. So this is when our kids, or ourselves, you know, this is when we just are paralyzed. We don't take that step because we're like, I have to be inactive, right? Well, I'm kind of thinking that we might need to expand our fight or flight or freeze a little bit further and maybe include flop. Because what I'm hearing from a lot of people these days is like, I just can't bother. Like, I just can't even do it. And it's almost like, you know, maybe I'll just like stay here in the cave and reach my arm out, and if I happen to find some berries or something, I'll eat them, but I'm not really going to exert much effort because when I go out there, it's not worth it. Like, there's too much to keep track of. There's too much to do. It's exhausting, and I can't take it anymore. And that's where I think we're seeing our kids feeling very, and ourselves, you know, feeling very much blah. And like, is that depression, or is that just kind of adjusting to what's happening around us, you know, which is sad either way, right? And we have, and we can protect ourselves from that either way, but we have to be pretty mindful about it, and intentional about it. So ups and downs, of course, are very much expected. You know, we should our mood should fluctuate, you know, in order to, and I'll get very zen, right? But like, in order to feel joy, you have to feel pain in order to, right? Like, the sort of, we need the opposites. In order to appreciate the highs, we need to have some lows, right? And that's just sort of like human nature. It is hard to say, so when we talk about anxiety, I think about, you know, how much does whatever this fear or worry is, how much does that actually interfere with this 10-year-old doing the things that typical 10-year-olds do? All right, well, if this 10-year-old is so afraid of vomit and throwing up or getting sick or somebody else throwing up that he refuses to, you know, eat because he doesn't want food in his stomach because he's decided if he's got food in his stomach then he's more likely to vomit, well, that's interfering, right? Like, that's not just, oh, I'm a little nervous, so maybe I'll take it light before I go do this physical activity or whatever. That's like, that's dangerous, right? That really interferes. So we think about how much does your worry actually interfere with your functioning. When it comes to depression, it is a little harder to draw that line. But I think what we are trying to consider are things like, you know, the lows, the down moods. And what I'm hearing from a lot of parents about their kids is like, just doesn't want to do anything anymore. You know, it's like, just all he wants to do is play on that iPad, you know, or stay up in her room, or she doesn't like care about anything anymore. And those are definitely symptoms of depression, you know, not caring about stuff, sort of isolating. Those are all things that would have me wondering about and inquiring about and looking into, is this depression? At the same time, I think that's a little bit of what I'm hearing from a lot of people, that this is just kind of like, we're tired, you know, and we don't have much energy. And so is it depression, or is it a way to try to cope and recharge and reset? So we're trying to think about things like the frequency or the duration, you know, so how often are you having like emotional meltdowns, or how long are you spending, you know, having these crying episodes? Is it all day? Does it ever go away? What kinds of things take it away? What are the triggers? You know, so if a person just sort of wakes up in a bad mood and they don't know why, and also they can't really identify what makes it go away, that's a little bit more concerning to me than, well, yeah, I don't really feel like going to school, but then when after school my friend asked if I wanted to come over or go get ice cream, my mom said, do you want to go get ice cream on the way home? I was like, yeah, I want to go get ice cream on the way home. That to me sounds like, you know, do you have a reason, like most kids this age or most people, you know, would feel excited about X, Y, or Z? Are they still feeling excited about X, Y, or Z? If not, that makes me a little bit more concerned, you know. But it is important to know that in kids, when we're talking about depression, people a lot of times think about sadness as depression. But in kids, depression oftentimes manifests as irritability. So that crankiness and the lashing out, that kind of thing we see oftentimes in anxiety or depression. And it's not necessarily the sadness. But we're also looking at, you know, change in sleep or appetite or interest or activity level. We're trying to see changes, and we might be thinking about, okay, well, this was my typical kid, this is how they've been over the last couple of years, you know, kind of thinking about, for some people who don't have tons of energy, I would be looking at, well, when they are out and about, what are they doing? So, you know, you can hear some of the kids in the gym over there. When they are at an aftercare event or a practice or something, are they participating? Are they engaged? Are they sort of like bringing their A game energy-wise? And so then when it's the weekend, they just don't feel like doing anything? That's a little more comforting to me than sitting on the sidelines at something like this when everybody else is playing and they're like, I'm not interested in it, or I want to, but I'm scared to. Right? Like those kinds of things are a little bit different. Okay, if after all this stuff you still don't really know if what you're seeing in your kid is typical, is a problem, is expected, what I would suggest is that you employ sort of what we call active surveillance. So this means you're keeping an eye on it, you're monitoring it, but you're doing something while you're monitoring. So you're not just like waiting to see if it goes away. You know, you're not just waiting to see if he or she grows out of it. You're going to take some steps as you're monitoring and try to evaluate, is it getting better? Is there no change, right? So what are the kinds of things that I want you to keep in mind? As you're putting in place some of these strategies and some of the and changing things up, I want you to keep in mind some of the losses that our kids are experiencing. So as we talk about, you know, the concern about safety, right? You know, or the conflict between adults, or like the climate around them. Death, divorce rates are really up right now. You know, kind of even the fact that school, you know, maybe do you have school? Is it going to shut down? You know, there's concern about that from periods of time where people are talking about what are we going to do, or is it going to be this way, is it going to be that way? Are we going to be allowed to have this thing? Is it going to be canceled? Kids I mean, it's really a false sense of security and certainty that we all go around experiencing, right? Like, we never ever have 100% guarantees about things, but we feel a sense of security or certainty or stability. All of what's going on right now, it's almost like the veil has been lifted, right? So that sort of sense of security and stability isn't there. It isn't as solid. When I talk about stimulation, so the other thing is, I started to really pick up on this from middle school and high school kids when schools were remote. And they were talking about things like, at first it was kind of nice to not be in school or whatever, but then they were starting to talk about how just boring it was. And as they're talking about how boring it is, and anybody who's had to spend a day, you know, in front of meetings or something online, you might be able to relate to this. But what some of the kids were starting to identify is, it's like, even if I'm not talking in class, even if I'm not participating, if I'm getting kind of bored of what the person is saying, I can kind of like wander and like start looking at other people. I'm kind of like, oh, what's she doing over there? You know, my brain can kind of like find interesting things around me. But when I'm just staring at a screen, there isn't that stimulation. You know, there isn't that like, even if I'm not participating in it, just noticing stuff, just having things going on around, novelty, different things, you know, like even some of that healthy stress, right? Like, oh, you know, am I going to get the right answer, or is that going to be, am I going to be embarrassed, or like, you know, that kind of stuff that elevates, that gives us some of those ups and downs and fluctuations in our mood and our level of alertness. That's what I think when I talk about stimulation, it's almost like just a flat line, right, of stimulation, as opposed to a lot of the ups and downs that we would typically get when we're socializing, you know, when we're in a group. So I talk about things like the mental stimulation, the physical stimulation, so a lot of, you know, a lot more like screen time or time sort of isolated, doing things indoors or sitting or in front of a, you know, even in school when, I think this is, you know, eased up a little bit this year, but when kids couldn't really move around in their classroom or in the hallways or, you know, working in groups and things like that, that they were doing before, that they had to adjust and kind of switch that up a little bit. The social stimulation, so all these kinds of things that they're sort of experiencing these decreases, I want you to keep that in mind as you're putting in place some of the supports. And I want you to be thinking about habits and bursts. So we talked last time about habits and routines, right? Think about, there are certain habits that we know can improve well-being. So things like good sleep routine, right? Like good sleep hygiene, getting to bed around the same time, waking up around the same time. We know that, you know, having meals with your family, those kinds of things can be good for your well-being. Getting regular exercise can be good for your well-being. So we know those kinds of habits that you can put in place can be good for you and can kind of shore up that foundation. But we want to think about, oh, and the habits also allow the benefits to build up, right? So, like, if you decided you were going to get in shape and you went for a run once, that's great, but you're probably not going to be in shape if you're really, like, out of shape or whatever. You're not going to be in shape after one run, right? You've got to build that up, and you've got to maintain it over time, right, and do it consistently in order to feel the effects of that and the benefits of that. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about putting in place some habits. But I think it's really, really important to also consider bursts. And when I talk about bursts, this is when I think about stimulation, you know, and people just kind of like going through their days, like I'm just going through the motions, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm not really thinking about it, I'm not really feeling, I'm just kind of numb to it all. We need bursts. We need increases in stimulation that are adaptive, right? Because what we end up doing is sometimes going to kind of get our bursts in things that are maybe not as good for us. So things like, you know, sugar or I don't know, like gossip or something like that. Things that are okay in small doses, right? But we don't want to build habits out of those bursts, right? Okay, but I also think that when you're talking about family stuff and kids, bursts are things that offer our kids something to look forward to. I know that people who work in schools probably really don't love like holiday time. I mean, I don't know, maybe I should not assume that. But I imagine there are times of the year that teachers of elementary school age kids do not look forward to because there's a lot of messes and activities and, you know, stuff to do and things to send home and all that stuff. But those are things that like break it up, right? And kids look forward to a lot of that kind of stuff. So we think about how you can do that in your home, especially if you're concerned about moodiness in your home. And like thinking about kids, all humans really, but kids especially, like they need a lot of play in their day. I mean, I don't know how many people in here have a dog. You know, like what are some of the things that we know? That's a huge amount of this audience has a dog. Is this like a really dog-friendly community? I feel like almost every single person raised their hand, and some people even raised 2 hands. But you know, if you want a well-behaved dog, a lot of times they need to have good exercise, right? And they need to have attention and exercise, and they need to, right? We need to make sure that we're in play. You know, I have a puppy, and if we're not playing with her, she will force us to play with her, right? She's gonna take something of ours. She's gonna come up and like, you know, engage us. She does that with our other dog, you know? It's like, we need to let her have opportunities to play, and it's the same with kids. They need to have that kind of play. But for humans, we need to have fun. We all need to have leisure activities. We all need to have things that we like to do in our days. So we would think about, when we're talking about, I just wanna make sure, yeah. Shoring up the foundation. So these are some of the things that you can do in that active surveillance. Like, these things are not gonna hurt. You're gonna put them in place. Hopefully they will help. If they don't help, then we know we might have to go sort of the next level or the next tier. But some of the things that you can put in place, monitor exposure to the news, monitor exposure to conflict, I would say. Now, I don't think that we should shield and protect our kids from all news and all conflict. But what I do think is that we should control the message. And our message should have some level of reassurance and stability and security and toning it down, okay? So think about, sometimes people talk about like a flight attendant. You know, and they make an analogy that parents should be like flight attendants for their kids. And you know, if the or like a pilot or something, like a comm pilot, that if there was some turbulence and a pilot, you know, comes on over the microphone and is like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on here, you guys, this is gonna be really bumpy, I hope it's okay, I don't know, crossing my fingers, you guys cross your fingers too, keep your seatbelts on, stay in your seats. Like if the pilot came on and was like really anxious and revved up like that, you would all be anxious, right? But they come on, they're like, okay, we're gonna experience a little bit of turbulence, we just want you to sit in your seat, it's like so boring, right? When I talk about this, it's like super boring because this is the voice that tells you, do not be alarmed, we're like under control, right? So when your kid comes home and says, wait, did you hear, what, are we going to war with Russia? You know, like, or comes home and says something, that's when you can say, or they bring up some other kind of conflict, right? Where there's two sides. You can say, well, you know, some people, vaccines, right? So this is something that a lot of kids are like, well, somebody told me I got vaccinated and now I'm never gonna be able to have a baby, you know? And it's like, okay, so, well, yeah, some people are concerned about this. Some people think this. Here's what I believe, here's why. You know, this is kind of what helps me get through, right? So, and I'm not saying this is the side you should be on or that's the side you should be on, but when you're parents, I think you wanna bring it down a couple notches, right? You wanna give the message like, this is under control. Yeah, you know, some people think this, some people think this. Here's the information I'm going with. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I think is right for us or best for us. Here's what I think is safe for us. Because again, that's reassuring. That's the stability, the security, right? Like there is somebody in charge here, okay? bringing back that structure and routine, especially the structure and routine that supports good sleep. Because everybody knows if you are not well rested, you are just not at your best, right? So if you aren't getting great sleep, you're gonna be more anxious. You're not gonna have tons of energy. You're not gonna feel like doing stuff. You're not gonna be able to learn as well, right? So we know, do what you can to get that good sleep in place. Adjust your expectations for yourself and for your kids and for other people. You should have expectations. I don't think you should just completely let everything go. But I think that you should make sure that they are reasonable and realistic and gracious. And when I say gracious, I mean people spill their drinks sometimes, right? Yes, you can expect that your kid is gonna try to be careful around fluids and liquids and not spill stuff all of the time, but it's probably gonna happen every now and then. You're probably gonna spill something every now and then, even though you're careful, it happens. When it happens, we don't have to point out what a big mistake that was, right? We can just pass over the paper towel and move on. And I think that's a part of what we have to be gracious with ourselves, and we have to be gracious with the people who live in our homes and who we interact with, that it's all right. Things like this happen. Let's figure out how to fix it or repair it and move on, right? Foster a sense of purpose and meaning and connection within your home and outside. So this is where I think some of those bursts come in. This is not just fluff. This is important stuff, okay? So things like little kids having jobs and chores, that is important. It not only teaches skills and helps you out, but we want our kids to feel like they matter. It actually matters that you're here helping out because you're the one who takes out the garbage. You're the one who sweeps the floor. You fill the dog's water bowl. We need you to do this. You're a part of us. We're a community. We help each other. You're essential, And of course, going back to being reasonable and realistic, you want to make sure that whatever the chores and jobs are reasonable and realistic, as in your kid can actually perform those jobs and with some success most of the time. But that is helpful. That also provides some of that security and that stability, right? We can count on this. We're a system. I have my role, you have your role. Having hobbies, things that you care about, things that you're interested in, that's all good stuff. I talk with too many high school age kids who will say things to me like, well, my parents want to know what's going on in my life, but all they ever talk to me about is my grades. Or well, did you do this for school? Did you do that for school? They never want to talk about other stuff, and usually, in fairness, when I ask, well, what other stuff would you want to talk about with your parents? They're like, no, I don't know. Nothing really, but they just never ask, that's the point. But, things like TV shows, things like, oh, I saw this. You don't even have to, it's not an interrogation. You don't have to ask questions all the time, but you can say things like, I saw the funniest thing today. I was driving to work and I saw this guy snow blowing the sidewalk in a unicorn suit, a costume or whatever, or I saw this on the news, whatever. Just mentioning things, just casual, bring it up in conversation. It doesn't always have to be taking care of business and are you on top of all of your work and have you done this and have you volunteering or helping others. So this can be organized or it can be just, a casual sort of oh, I saw Mrs. So-and-so's garbage cans are still out. Can you bring them up to her garage for her, right? Be a part of the community, help out, do other things. If you've got, fundraisers in the school and things like that, this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine, so please, if you are working in the schools, please, please, please take this into consideration. School fundraisers, if it's we're doing Jump Rope for Heart, talk to the kids about it. Don't just send an email to the parents. A lot of times I feel for fundraisers, I'll ask my kids, they're like, I don't know. But aren't you the one supposed to be doing this? This is your school. This is your job. Not me to be doing it. But if you're doing something like Jump Rope for Heart, helping kids understand, why are you doing this? Why are you pitching in? And we, of course, keeping in mind, like, exposure to, you know, trauma, we don't want to, like, scare them or upset them with, like, all these sad details or whatever, but we want to help them understand in a measured way, well, you know what, there are people who need help, or there are, you know, there's organizations that help people with this kind of problem, and that's what your school's raising money for, is to help people who need blah, blah, blah. You know, so what kinds of things can we do? Or who do you want to ask, or whatever, so that you're getting them involved. But it's that sense of purpose, it's that meaning, it's that feeling like it actually does matter if I get up and do stuff today because people are counting on me, but it's all reasonable expectations, right? It's not so much pressure that I feel like I can't live up to those expectations. Just playing, laughing, you know, having traditions, having projects that you're trying, just being silly, doing silly things, making, you know, like laughing about funny, inappropriate songs or whatever that your kids say, just letting your guard down for a minute, you know, and having those moments of levity. But if worries and fears are getting in the way and interfering, the reason why that is happening is that they're danger alert. So, you know, going back to the cavemen, right? They're out of their cave and they're looking for food and they hear a noise. They hear like a rustling in the woods or something. Their brains are automatically, and cavemen had very small brains with few functions, right? They couldn't reason or really like think, they couldn't do any kind of critical thinking. They were just really about surviving, you know? So if they heard all this rustling in the woods, their brains would automatically send off this danger alarm. Like, danger, keep yourself safe, run away, get ready to fight, try to blend in, you know? What happens with people who have anxiety is they have an overactive danger alarm. So their danger alarm is going off when there really is no danger. There really isn't a realistic threat, but they feel like there is a realistic threat. Their brain and their body is responding like they're in danger. We don't want to get rid of fight or flight or freeze because remember, it's protective. If your kid is stepping out into the street, they're on the curb and they're stepping out into the street and they hear a car coming down the street, we want them to do what? Freeze, right? We don't want them to step off the curb. We want them to stay right there on the curb and freeze. We don't want them to have to think, like, should I fight this car? Should I karate chop it? Or should I try to run as fast as I can across? No, we want their brain to take over and say, freeze, don't move. This is gonna protect you, right? So the fight or flight or freeze response is helpful, but in people who have anxiety, they are operating at a state where they are constantly having to be vigilant and monitor, like, the dangers around them, okay? So they are up here and ready to fight at any moment. Or flight, by the way, is not just running away from predators. Flight is trying to get out of something. So it is like, please don't make me do that. Please don't make me go to school. Please don't leave my bedroom at night. Please stay in here with me. Please don't go, right? So it's trying to escape or avoid what it is that is making them feel anxious. All right, so this is what happens. So that's the alarm there. Okay, so down here at the bottom of the curve, okay, is where the trigger happens. So let's say who's got a kid dealing with some anxiety? Give me a trigger. What's a situation that tends to make them anxious? Okay, so separation from dad. Dad leaves the room, he goes outside. That dad's leaving is the trigger, okay? Her anxiety builds. Now, it might be that she knows he's going somewhere. You know, maybe there's grandma's coming over and dad's got to go out for something, and so maybe that anxiety is building over time, or maybe it happens pretty fast because he says, hey, I'm going to go take the garbage out or whatever, and she's like, no, I'm coming with you, right? So it could happen over time, it could happen pretty immediately, but that trigger is there, the anxiety builds. When the anxiety peaks, so at that top where I've kind of colored it all in red, no one thinks they can take it anymore, because that's when she is grabbing you, clinging to your leg, like you are dragging her as you're trying to just get a moment of peace, right? Or you're trying to but it's fine, Grace, you're trying to reason with her, you're trying to make it better, but she is screaming, she's clinging to you, she's panicking, she's hitting, she has become a demon child, or she is melting down and falling apart, and you feel like she's just going to cry herself to death or something if you leave. It's at this peak where no one thinks they can handle it anymore. We cannot stay here in this red zone for a second longer, so we will let you escape or avoid that. Okay, come on, just come with me. Come with me, and you can come with me while I take the garbage out. Or, okay, fine, I'll stay home, or okay, fine, you can sleep with me, or whatever it is. But we allow that escape or avoidance because none of us feel good in that red zone. All of us are escalated in that red zone, right? When there's the escape or the avoidance, so okay, fine, just come with me, or I won't leave. Everybody feels better, right? That's where you've got that straight line down. The anxiety goes down, and everyone feels better until the next time. Because what you are doing when you're allowing that escape and avoidance is you're just staying on this one side of the anxiety curve. What we try to teach kids and what we need for parents to understand and what we need people to understand is that uncomfortable feeling you have at that peak where you feel like you can't take it any longer, it will go away. Your body will get used to that feeling. It will go away. You will not stay in that place. You can get through it. Your body needs a little time to get used to it, and your brain will learn that you're not in any real danger. You need to give your body and your brain time to recognize, oh, that was a false alarm, I'm fine, and you will relax. It will get better. And then the next time it happens, hopefully you feel better sooner, or you don't get as uncomfortable. But it is really, 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 really hard to stay in that escalated place where you're feeling like you can't take it anymore. It's hard for parents and it's hard for kids. So that's where I always draw my toolbox and say we need tools to help you get through that because it doesn't feel good. And I a lot of times give an analogy of swimming in a pool. And I'll say to kids, pretend you're the kind of kid who loves to swim, but you hate to be cold. So have you ever gone swimming in a pool where you get in and it feels cold right away? And most kids will say yeah, okay. So if you hate being cold, you might. What would you do? Would you just get out of the pool and say wrap me up like a burrito, and okay, now that's nice and warm and cozy, and that feels so much better. Now I'm going to go swimming because I love going swimming. And you get in the pool, and it feels cold. So then you're okay, wrap me up like a burrito. I feel so much warmer and better now in this cozy towel and outside the pool because I don't like being cold, but I love swimming. So now I'm going to go swimming and go in the pool, but it's cold, right? We don't do that. We know that if we get into the pool and it feels cold, what's going to happen? Your body's going to adjust, and you're going to get used to it, and it's not going to feel as cold. What I tell kids, though, is if you look around a swimming pool sometimes, you might see people doing little tricks. So, let's say they get in the pool, and it feels cold. Some people, they're well, I'm just going all in. They just dive right under, they get it over with, they get their head under, and it's all over with, right? They adjust, that lets them adjust really quickly. Other people are doing their bobs, trying to warm up, right? But people learn little tricks and tools to make that getting used to it time feel better. Maybe it makes it go faster, maybe it helps them get through it. They learn tools to make it feel better. But don't get out of the pool. So if you get out of the pool, you're just going to be comfortable for a second, then you're going to want to go back in the pool, then you're going to get out, then you're going to make it, and now it's time to go home and you haven't even had a chance to swim, right? So we can let our bodies get used to that feeling, but we need to give our kids tools while they wait for their body to get comfortable. So what I always think, kids and parents, I try to help them understand that when you're feeling anxious, we have to think about a triangle. We have to think about the thoughts that go along with feeling anxious. Those kind of thoughts are things like, what if something bad happens? Or they might be thinking about it's going to be awful, or the worst thing ever is going to happen, or I'm not going to be able to do it. They have these patterns of thinking that makes them feel maybe worried or scared or anxious. We have physiological reactions that go along with feeling anxious. So those are things like tight muscles, or a stomach ache, or a headache, or getting hot, or feeling sweaty, or feeling cold, or feeling shaky, or feeling dizzy. People feel anxiety in their bodies, and not everybody feels it the same way. So we really want to help our kids understand how they feel when they're anxious. And then we also want to understand, what are those behaviors? So what are the things that you do when you feel anxious? Well, I usually ask my mom, am I going to throw up? Wait, but no, really, am I going to throw up? Could this make me throw up? Well, if I ate that, will that make me throw up? So we maybe ask for reassurance, or we go closer to our dad. We go in his room, or we stay right next to him, or we call out his name, Dad, just to get that response, like wherever Dad is, to then, okay, now I heard his voice, now I feel good, So what are the things that you do when you feel anxious? We want to understand what that triangle is. Some people are really good at identifying the way that their body feels, but maybe not their thoughts. Vice versa, some people are really good at understanding their thoughts, but maybe not how their body feels. But it's important to understand those points of the triangle, because we also have calm thoughts, calm physiological reactions. Our bodies feel a certain way when we are relaxed. And we have behaviors that we know make us feel calm. So if we know the opposite, right? If we know how the things that we can think about or do to relax our bodies, or do to help us feel comfortable and calm, then we are going to be able to manage the anxiety triangle, right? So some of the things that we teach are tools to help our kids change their thoughts. So we often talk about, these are some terms that are thrown around a lot, but ANTS, so that stands for automatic negative thoughts. There's actually a pretty good book for young kids, elementary age kids. It's called Captain Snout, and he's an anteater. And it's like the amazing superpower questions or something. But he goes through explaining all of these different patterns of automatic negative thoughts, right? So maybe like there's the mind reader. So the mind reader ant thinks that he knows what other people are thinking. Well, they're all going to think I'm stupid. They're all going to think I'm ugly or whatever. They're going to get mad at me if I ask. No, my teacher will get mad at me if I ask a question. Well, are you 100% sure that's true? Are you sure you're sure? That kind of breaking that pattern is something that can be really helpful, because we know it's not a situation that makes a person feel the way that they feel. It's their thought about the situation that makes them feel the way they feel. So you might be, let's say you're gonna start playing basketball for the first time ever. Your kid expressed an interest in playing basketball, so you're like, okay, I'm gonna sign you up for basketball. And they're really excited about basketball, and they're gonna become a professional basketball player when they grow up. And now it is time to go to basketball for the first practice, and they're like, do not make me go to basketball for the first time. I've never played this sport before, and it's gonna be awful, and I'm gonna be embarrassed, and I don't know what the coach is gonna be like, and I don't know who the kids are there, right? And so if their thinking is, I'm gonna be the only one who's never played before, it's gonna be so embarrassing. If they have that thought, how are they feeling? Excited about going? No, they are going to try to protect themselves, right? Like, why? If you believe, I am going to walk into this building and it is going to catch on fire and I will immediately burn to my death, you would not walk in that building, right? Like, you are going to protect yourself. You're not going to do it. So if you are convinced that you are walking into the line of fire at this basketball practice for the first time, you're not going to do it, right? So we have to help kids learn how to break up those patterns and change their thinking. This is really important. We aren't trying to tell them, it will be fine, you'll be great, you'll love it. challenging unhelpful, automatic negative thoughts with like rainbows and unicorns, it's la la la, no problems here, you're gonna be fine, you'll be the best one there, is not helpful, okay? What we wanna do is acknowledge that there might be some kind of struggle or problem or challenge and reassure that they can get through it. We wanna help them, we wanna guide them through that moment of discomfort. So yeah, well, maybe there will be other new players. I can practice before I go so I can feel a little bit more comfortable maybe. And maybe I can watch a video. So like some kids who are anxious, they, my niece actually just tried skiing for the first time and she was pretty nervous about it, but she watched a video of a little kid at a ski lesson on YouTube and that like helped her feel pretty comfortable, you know, like my daughter did that with riding a bike. She like knew how to ride a bike, you know, like you're running behind and she is riding a bike. And then as soon as I would let go, or to be honest, my husband, because I really never did that with her, but I think it's better if I say that I was doing it, but as soon as he would let go, because I would watch, you know, she would just stop pedaling because she'd be afraid to fall. It's like, well, you will fall if you stop pedaling. You've got to keep pedaling, right? She is a very visual, kind of like observant sort of person, and we watched YouTube videos of kids learning how to ride a bike, and she got it then, you know, like she needed that warm-up time, right? So helping kids like reorient themselves with some more helpful thoughts. Helpful thoughts have to be believable, they have to be realistic, encouraging and guiding, maybe help you see other perspectives, and talk about like a buddy or a bully or a good coach or a bad coach. So for some kids, I try to figure out like, and so if you're their parent and you know that they've had a coach who they really liked, or maybe a coach who they really didn't like, or a teacher who they really liked, or a teacher who they really didn't like, you can remind them of that. And you can help them try to figure out like, okay, so, you know, Coach so-and-so, if you guys were playing a really hard team, like, he was a pretty good coach. What kinds of things would he tell you when you guys were playing a really tough team? Well, he'd tell us, like, you guys, you know, just, you gotta stay strong, you gotta make sure you go towards the ball, you know, don't just stand there watching, you're just gonna go to it, attack the ball. Okay, so he would tell you what to do. Yeah, he would tell us what to do. Okay, and if you made a mistake, what would you do? He'd say, it's all right, it's okay, you got this, focus on the next one, right? So, okay, so he's encouraging, he helped you focus on the next one. So you want to try to help them understand, like, what are some of the things that a good coach might say to help you through a tough time, and what are some of the kinds of things that, like, a bad coach, or we talk about, like, a bully or a buddy, but that whole kind of cartoon concept of, like, an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder. People experience that, and we want them to listen to that good coach. You know, so kind of like if they're debating in their head, we want them to listen to the good coach voice. Calm body, so things like learning deep breathing. Oftentimes this is referred to as belly breathing or balloon breathing. A lot of times I'll say to kids, like, you know, do you think your mom or dad knows how to take a deep breath for relaxation? And we'll try to like put the parent on the spot or whatever, and I'll say like, because sometimes when I ask people to take a deep breath, they do something like this, like, but does this look very relaxing? You know, and like, no, it doesn't look relaxing. No, okay, so when you take a deep breath for relaxation, you're breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And when you breathe in through your nose, it's like you're blowing up a balloon in your belly. So I say like, okay, watch my shoulders, they're gonna stay pretty still. And sometimes I put one hand on my chest and one hand on my belly, and I'll say, okay, so when I breathe in, you can kind of see my belly expand. When I breathe out, it goes back to normal. So breathe in, breathe out. Practice it. Some kids who are anxious, they feel kind of uncomfortable doing that in an office setting with somebody like me watching, but that's something that you can practice at home. And there are tons and tons of videos on YouTube that walk kids through this. Amy Poehler has a video called Just Breathe, and it's all about breathing when you're feeling angry or when you're feeling upset. And there's, you know, calm music that goes along with it and all that stuff. Progressive muscle relaxation, so that's like learning how to tighten muscle groups and relax them. And that's, you know, if you know how to feel tense, then you know how to feel, you can train your body to tense up, you can train your body to relax. When I say making lemonade, sometimes I'll talk to little kids, I'll say like, okay, I'll pretend I'm like putting a fake lemon in their hand, and I'll say like, okay, so I want you to squeeze these lemons. We're gonna make lemonade, so squeeze those lemons as hard as you can, as hard as you can. Sort of like squeezing their fists. They're really tightening up their fists. I'm like, okay, can you feel your arms getting so tight? You're squeezing them so hard, so hard, so hard. Okay, and now relax. Take a drink of that lemonade. Like we're relaxed, right? Or like sometimes we play like ragdoll, where you're just like trying to make your whole body loose, So teaching different kinds of muscle relaxation strategies, but also things like yoga or stretches or exercise, sensory activities. Somebody told me this, I think I took like a newborn baby class or something when I was pregnant, and the nurse said like, if you've got a fussy baby, water or fresh air or whispering, those are things that are gonna calm down a baby. And it's kind of true, right? Like put that baby in a bath if they're really cranky, and sometimes that just kind of like switches it up a little bit. Walk them over to a window. Kids are kind of like that too. Adults are kind of like that too. Like, get up and have a change of scenery. Step outside for a second, get a drink of water, right? These are the kind of little like breaks that we might teach them to do. Helpful action. So what are some of the things you can do while you wait for those uncomfortable feelings to go away? So sometimes we think about distractions, getting engaged in something fun, okay? So think about, as parents, you should probably have on hand and in your mind different activities that you can do with a kid who's feeling anxious, okay? So those might be things like jokes or riddles, so have them in your mind, or have something on your person that you can just pull out and use. I Spy, so if you're in the doctor's office and your kid's waiting for a shot, or you're whatever, they're anxious about something that's going to happen, start playing a little game. Get their mind occupied on something else. For little kids, you do this in a way without like really telling them what's happening, but for older kids, tell them what's happening. Sometimes if you're thinking about it, you might feel more worried. So let's do this. Okay, challenges. All right, so name as many places you can think of at Crocker Park. Okay, name as many fast food restaurants as you can think of. Just kind of get them thinking about other things. Those are grounding techniques. Get it out of your brain or of your heart. So maybe write it down, draw a picture of it, talk to somebody about it. So just kind of get it out from swirling around in your head. Get information, make a plan. So if you're nervous about something, well, let's try to watch a video. Let's see what we can find out about it. Let's make a plan for how you're gonna get through it. So some kids I know feel really uncomfortable separating from a parent, right? So you might kind of plan for, I know you feel kind of like uncomfortable when we say goodbye, so what kind of plan can we come up with? What are the things that we can do? Okay, so how about, you think of a joke while you're at school or whatever, you be thinking of a joke and I'm gonna be thinking of a joke, and when you come home from school, we'll trade jokes. Or by the way, I left something for you in your lunchbox or whatever. So you kind of have your plan to help them get through that moment while they wait for their body to adjust. Because for a lot of kids with separation anxiety included, it's the saying goodbye part that's hard, but once we're separated, it's like kind of okay. Babysitters will tell you that, preschool teachers will, once you leave it, give it 5-10 minutes, it'll be okay. That's not the case for all kids, and some kids need to work harder, but for a lot of kids, once they get used to it, they'll be okay. Take some time to observe and warm up. I had a kid who would get very, very anxious about practices because at the beginning of soccer practice, you sort of have to find a partner and just pass a little bit until the structured stuff started. So we said, okay, yeah, you're the kind of kid who, at a birthday party, at a soccer practice, whatever, you just kind of feel uncomfortable until it gets going, until everybody's engaged in what they're supposed to do. So you know that you need a plan for warming up. So how about when you go to soccer, walk out to the field and make sure your shoelaces are not tied. So then when you get out to the field, you just kind of sit down, tie your shoelaces. While you're tying your shoelaces, you're kind of looking around, okay, so so-and-so's here at practice, so-and-so's here, okay, oh, all right, the coach wants everybody to get partnered. This kid just needed to figure it out before he jumped into it, right? So he needed a little time to sit and observe, and that's okay. You can build that in. You can have a comfort object, a bracelet or something like that just makes you feel a little bit better. So maybe for you, and this is just the last slide, guys, but maybe for you, your role right now is to teach some of these skills, you know, and help them learn how to change their thoughts or learn how to relax. Maybe for you right now, your role is to just be a good model of it. So to even say things like, I'm just feeling kind of stressed right now. We've got all these people coming over. I need to remind myself, Megan, these are your friends. This is your family. They're here because they want to be with you, not because they care about your house. And besides, they know you're kind of a disaster anyway, so they will not be surprised by the piles of mail on the counter. Like, they're just here to have a good time, right? And no one's going to have a good time if you're crabby and stressed out, right? So sometimes you can just say those things out loud and be that model for your kid who's going to pick up on that kind of stuff. Maybe your role is to prompt a guide. Remember we learned about those deep breaths? How about you try taking some of those deep breaths? If a kid is already pretty elevated and escalated, they are not going to be very receptive to those sorts of suggestions. So you will have to learn the right timing for that kind of prompting and guidance. Maybe your role is to support or to advocate for your kid, but it really is going to depend on where you're starting and who your kid is and kind of what you've got space for. These are just some resources that you might be interested in, some workbooks and websites and things like that, but I want to make sure to take your questions. So, just these two questions?
So there were several, but there were how many?
Okay.
Already addressed, so we still what seemed to be now answering the question.
Okay, so a couple questions. First is, my child has meltdowns at home but is fine at school. I'm not sure how to help her. Okay, so this is very, very, very common, where a kid will keep it together all day or in public or around certain people. It is not uncommon for anxious people to care very much about what impressions other people have of them. So they oftentimes want to follow the rules. They oftentimes, like any teacher who has like a behavior chart or a clip chart with like the status of every student's behavior, that kid will be able to come home and report to you like, these people were on green and these people were on it and this person did it. They are very, very focused on who is following the rules, am I following the rules, what is my standing with this person, and what do they think of me, right? So they're very much, their mental energy is like being spent on, I'm trying to just kind of blend in here. I want to make sure that no predator is going to see me and try to eat me, so I just don't want to create any waves. I'm kind of like trying to act natural, don't break any rules, right? Like, they're elevated. You know, if your kid is so aware of not breaking any rules and what are they a good kid all day at school, they are going through the day in a very elevated state. And so when they come home and they can let their guard down, oftentimes you might see like a very abrupt kind of explosion, and it's almost as if it's like a fit that has to be had, like I need to just let go of all of this energy, and then sometimes they're better, or some kids all evening is tough because they're keeping it together so much during the day. I think that this is where I use a lot of that Alexander and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day stuff, or just that kind of concept of like, this kind of stuff builds up. And so when you come home, you know, I want home to be a place where you can relax and reset and recharge. We don't want to feel like grumpy towards each other, right? But sometimes when you come home and you're like throwing stuff, and then I get upset because you're throwing stuff at me, and then, you know, now it turns into like a place that you don't feel very relaxed and calm. So what are we going to do? What's our plan? Some kids will do things like, some kids, we have like a little bucket kind of container where they can actually, we talk about like all the stuff they're carrying around all day that's stressing them out, bothering them, and they like put that in the container. Sometimes they want to talk about it, sometimes they don't, but they take it off. Like, this is behind me, it's kind of a concrete and visual way to say that is behind me, I'm leaving it here, and I'm not bringing it into the rest of my house, right? I have other kids who will tell me, yes, I tell my mom I don't want to talk about it, or please stop asking me questions, but she keeps asking me questions. And then I yell at her, and then I get in trouble, right? So listen to your kids' signals, if they're like coming home and they're burnt out and like strung out from the day, give them a little time and space. One kid actually we made a little necklace. Her parents were okay with us doing this. It wasn't like a disrespectful thing, but she made a little necklace, like how stores will say like closed for lunch or whatever. She made a little necklace as a reminder of like, could you just not ask me any questions? Like, give me a little, I'm closed right now for lunch. No demands, no questions. And then she would, have her little decompression time. And then the necklace would flip over and it was like, okay, now I'm ready to like interact. Now, of course, there are some kids who are gonna like, hey, go clean your room. Closed for lunch, right? She wasn't that kind of kid who would do that. Although I would say if a kid is doing that, that would actually not be bad information to know that like they're able to say, okay, that is stressful to me. What's stressful to you about it, or is it just that you don't want to do it? But we can work through that, right? So giving some tools for communicating what I need right now, and knowing that sometimes when your vase is filling up and you're about to overflow, you need to just stop. Like life needs to just stop for a little bit or pause for a little bit. Sometimes kids will say, well, because I just want to come home and relax, but you want me to get my homework done, but I just really want to like eat a snack and not think about anything. Parents like, yes, but if we just get our homework done, then you can get onto the free time, and sometimes that isn't really the best setup for the kid, but talking that through and figuring it out is oftentimes helpful. Okay, so my child also does not like things sprung on him last minute, but also builds up anxiety if I tell him too early. Oh yeah, so the sweet spot, right? So like a kid who needs preparation, but will spend a lot of time in that anticipatory anxiety, like worrying about it until it happens phase, right? So kind of depends on the kid and on the age, but in a similar way where I'm talking about like making a plan for, are you the kind of kid who needs a little bit of peace and quiet when you get home? Just talking that through and actually like, we are all on the same page. This is what we're going to do. This is what causes the problem, and this is what we're going to try to do. You can create a kind of similar process with somebody who likes preparation, but they don't like to worry about it too much. So for some kids, we talk about different phases. Here's phase 1. This is what's going to happen. Okay, now in phase, and I'm going to give you kind of a general idea of what's happening. You can ask any questions you're thinking about it, but we're not going to talk about it until phase 2, which is like when we actually need to get ready to do it. Okay, so, well, today, I'm giving you the note because we're going to go to the doctor's office today, so you got to give this note to your teacher. Like, that's phase 2. We're actually taking steps about it now. Like, it's happening, right? I can't ignore it. And then phase 3 is like, it's actually occurring, like you're at the doctor's office or you're doing whatever the trigger is. But so kind of helping them break it up into different phases. So if they're starting to get into phase 3 where they're like, I gotta protect myself from this, you're like, okay, wait, you just stepped into phase 3. We're still in phase 1. So this is still like information gathering zone, so you can kind of help them divide it up. And just people's brains, this is very crude to think about it this way, but like, it's easy to think about a feeling side of your brain and a thinking side of your brain. And when people are anxious, they are only operating in the feeling side of their brain. They are not using the thinking side of their brain. And they can't really think about anything complex, but if you start to get them to think about easy stuff, that's why I was saying like those grounding techniques, name 5 fast food restaurants. If you're getting them to think about things that are easy and within their reach, their feeling brain calms down a little bit. So so you can help them in those different phases. Like this is the phase where we're thinking and planning. This is the phase where you're using those tools like what's going to be of comfort. So like holding hands or what's going to help you feel comfortable while you wait for that moment to go away. Is it looking at something else? Is it distracting yourself? What is it that you need to feel comfortable in those moments? Good? Okay.
We need to thank Dr. Barlow because that was just awesome. Thank you. I know there were some more questions, and we tried our best, and we went over on the time again. This stuff is so interesting, and it's so important, so, no, that's okay. And I know there were maybe a few more questions, so maybe we can get your help on some of those if we need to respond, like, I can send those out. Make sure, first of all, my name is Julianne Allen. I'm the one that's been bothering you with my emails, and my reminders, and then my emails about the reminder, another reminder, another reminder. But thanks for showing up. So again, thank you, Dr. Barlow, so much. You're incredible. You're very entertaining as well. Like, I could listen to you all night, but I'm sure you have things to do. Also, I would like the t-shirt that says, please don't ask me any questions. Because sometimes I just don't want to talk to anyone at my home, which is why I'm here. Okay, don't forget to sign in at your table so I can email you all this stuff. I can email you the presentation and any other resources. Please give us some feedback. Scan that little code on your table. It's like 3 questions. It just helps us to know we made some changes for this time. So whatever feedback we get for the next one, we can make some more changes or some adjustments. The next one is Monday, March 7th. And that one is on friendships, conflict resolution, and social skills. So that one sounds good too. So make sure you are registered for that. You may have already done so, but I'll be reminding you again. So don't forget to grab a cookie. Don't forget your children. And don't forget to reach out to your counselors at school. They can help. And again, don't forget your children, okay? And thank you for coming.